Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Barker, and I have the honor of serving as president of Clemson University. I'm back in my home territory here, and it feels good. I just walked through the studios up there. There are actually students on Bowman Field playing Frisbee, and there's students in the studios working. It's hard to imagine that would be the case, but that is in fact the case here. It is my genuine pleasure to welcome you to the first lecture in the Charles E. Fraser Visiting Associates Program, sponsored by Clemson Center for Real Estate Development. And I want to give a special welcome to Mary Fraser, who's hiding behind that screen. Mary, welcome. We're glad that you're here, and we want to welcome you home. I also want to welcome the faculty and students and members of the Urban Land Institute who are with us today. And we're honoring the legacy of Charles Fraser, who dramatically affected the economic vitality of the state of South Carolina. His vision helped transform Hilton Head, the island there, from a sparsely populated sea island into a world-class resort. He was a pioneer in master plan community development, encouraging the retention of open space, developing mixed-use facilities, and using creative deed restrictions and covenants to ensure that high-quality design would take place on that island. Charles was a graduate of the University of Georgia with a law degree from Yale. He was chairman of the 5,000-acre Sea Pines plantation community from 1956 to 1983. He planned and initiated development not only of Hilton Head Island and River Hills plantations, but also Kiowa Island Resort in South Carolina, Brandy Mill in Virginia, and Palmas del Mar in Mexico. Charles was also involved in planning for Disney's new urban community called Celebration, among many others. And he and his family were instrumental in founding the PGA Tournament Heritage Classic on Sea Pines in 1969. Talking about Celebration, I had the privilege of going there recently when we had our bowl game in Orlando, and I wanted to see Celebration. So I went, and what I saw as I walked around the town center and the housing areas, every time I turned the corner, I saw the genius of Charles Fraser there. It was everywhere evident, and it was sort of like I was coming home in some way. It was a very special experience to be there. It's hard for us to think about it now, but in the 1950s, Beaufort County was impoverished, and Charles Fraser's vision of an environmentally oriented resort community was at the very vanguard of modern resort development, and the concern about his work in terms of state-of-the-art ecological planning. And Sea Pines became a training ground for developers, architects, land planners, and many others. It was formerly timberland, but Sea Pines was designed with nature by using natural building materials, blending with the surroundings, and designing lots to maximize views and restricting the development itself in the right kind of ways, building streets and lots that were meandering through protected trees, just as you saw in that video. Natural vegetation and animal habitat were very important in the design work. Charles was the first recipient of the AIA's Certificate of Excellence in Private Community Planning in 1968, and the first recipient of ULI's Citation for Excellence in Large-Scale Recreation Community Development in 1985. And those are two very important recognitions from in our profession. I must tell you this story. I'll try to be brief. But in 1968, the Clemson design studios were going along very well. Everything was just humming in that design studio world upstairs. And this kind of comfortable environment troubled Harlan McClure. Those of you who knew Harlan would know that this was not right. Things were supposed to be much different than that. He wanted to shake things up. So he borrowed an idea, I think, from England and created vertical studios. That was the idea of putting together on teams second, third, and fourth year students so that they would tackle very large and complex problems. And it was his way of sort of getting us out of our comfortable environment. Now, I was a third year student at that time, and in the midst of all this chaos, he decided that he would go even further, and he brought in a colleague from Italy to teach the studio in which I was involved. His name was the professor, a doctor named Cesare Ferra. And the project was to be, for our team, was to be called Harbor Town on Hilton Head Island. And into this mix of characters comes Charles Fraser, who was to be our client to design this new town. And we began by visiting the site, and Charles drove all of us around the island in a fleet of Jeeps that was there, that he had for whatever occasion. And he constantly lectured on community design and human ecology. That was the phrase that he was using, and as you will note, that's what this whole endowment is named for. That was his term. We stayed at the William Hilton Inn, and it was a remarkable experience. It helped shape the way I look at the world. I'm convinced of it. With Cesare Ferrer's influence, we decided to study Portofino near Genoa as our inspiration. And now when I look at Harbor Town, and maybe through these images you see, there was a certain amount of bulkhead that we could use because that's what was built into the budget. There was to be a lighthouse, and its location was critical in the design. But as I think about that and look at this images over 40 years, you can see that influence of Portofino in today's Harbor Town. So students, when you do projects, you never know when those ideas are actually going to be used, and this was the case where some of them were actually used. Let me say one more footnote to this story. I had never seen Spanish moss before going to this, to the island, and I decided that we could all be inspired if we took some of that back and hung it in the studios while we were doing our work. I didn't have any idea probably that was illegal, or that they had red bugs in that stuff, and that so somewhere about the middle of this charrette we were working, we couldn't finish our drawings for scratching. We were just all eaten up with these red bugs. But I say all that to you to tell you about my personal interest and experience with Charles Fraser. Unfortunately, Charles died in a boating accident in 2002, but his legacy clearly lives on. This endowment, called the Fraser Endowment in Community Design and Human Ecology, which was established in 1992 and funded by friends and associates of Mr. Fraser. We are proud at Clemson to sponsor this lecture series, among other events that are part of that endowment. And I encourage you to read the handout chapter in ULI's Leadership Legacies book, which describes his substantial influence. I really believe that Charles Fraser is one of South Carolina's greatest citizens of the 20th century. Mr. Fraser had numerous associates who became national leaders in development, and they are affectionately known as Charlie's Angels, although I don't know if that series came out after that or not. But this afternoon we are very fortunate and honored to have a Clemson alum and vice chair of the Clemson Foundation, soon to be chair of the Clemson University Foundation, to speak about Charles and his impact on East-West Partners, which is our speaker's company, a premier Colorado-based development company. You all have Harry Frampton's detailed resume. He was the executive vice president of Sea Pines and a Fraser associate for all of his professional life. He's also been a great friend of Clemson and supportive of our efforts in real estate development. In the past 2 years, Harry was the chairman of the Urban Land Institute. Most of you know this institute is a nonprofit research and education organization supported by 28,000 members worldwide and dedicated to responsible land use and creating better places around the world. Harry announced the establishment of the ULI Charles Fraser Senior Resident Fellow for Sustainable Development, employing the former Director of Land Use Programs for the Conservation Fund. Harry's been a leading proponent nationally of encouraging smart growth and sustainable community development, and I want to welcome you, Harry, to Clemson, back home to Clemson again, and look forward to your comments about Charles Fraser and his impacts on today's development. And for all of you, it's a pleasure to introduce my friend and fraternity brother, Harry Frampton.
I quite frankly never thought I would be old enough to have had a fraternity brother who is president of Clemson. It is just phenomenal. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. It's quite an honor. Terry asked me to do this about 6 to 9 months ago. He told me it would be 10 to 15 students, and I told him fine, and this is obviously a larger group. But it is a pleasure to be here. It's a little bit of a difficult talk. I've had to give probably 50 or 60 speeches over the last few years in my role at ULI, and to be honest with you, I've struggled with this one a little bit, and Terry and I had 2 or 3 different conversations about what I should talk about. I really concluded, though, that what I wanted do is to try to pass on some of the incredible lessons that I learned and others learned from Charles that might help some of the students here. And I would do that first. And try to give also some personal insights into Charles, because he's such not only a phenomenal and extraordinary person, but someone who is quite unique and special, and hopefully that will help you. It certainly helped us in building our company. Secondly, he asked me to give an overview of our business, East West Partners. I'm going to do my best not to make it a commercial, but if you will bear with me, but hopefully there's some lessons there that would be helpful. Third, I'll talk a little bit about some insights I've got on how maybe some of you can get into the real estate business or the hospitality business, because whenever I talk to students over the last few years, that's always the first question. How do I get into this industry? So anyway, that's a little bit of an overview. I couldn't help but ride into Clemson today and think about how my Sea-Pines experience started. I was completing my 5th year of study at Clemson. I liked it so much, and had a summer off before I was to start a job in October. I had about 4 or 5 months. My wife Susan and I had been here, and I had gone almost every day to the Student Affairs office, and I was looking for a job, and I had a goal of living down near the beach for those 4 months. And I walked into and was talking to Dean Coakley, and I had actually told him that. And he said, "You should look on the bulletin board. There's a job being advertised at Sea-Pines," which I didn't know where it was. It's on the bulletin board, and you should go look at that. And I did, and I walked down, and there was a job that was advertised by Harold Depkin, who was a sales manager who works for Charles, and it said that they wanted somebody to give historical tours on Hilton Head for the next 4 months. And I said, "Wow, that sounds pretty good." My wife was from Beaufort. And this was on a Thursday, and I just remember it like it was yesterday. And I said, "That sounds great." And I went home that night and told Susan, I said, "Let's get in the car in the morning and drive to Hilton Head." And we did. We got up early on Friday morning. I drove to Hilton Head, and of course, nobody knew what Hilton Head was at that time. And I, on the way down, stopped and called Harold Epkin and had lunch with him, and he hired me right after lunch that next day. And what an incredible adventure and journey it started. But I do think that I learned one really neat lesson out of that has followed me in business. Is the importance of being action-oriented and having a sense of urgency. It's what I see in leaders everywhere and successful people. They do it, and they do it now. They don't put things off. And I'm not quite sure why I did that, but I know that if I would have waited 4 or 5 days and sent in a resume or do whatever, I would not have gotten that job, and it would certainly have very much impacted my life. And I know there are a lot more examples of that, and I see it with the young people that work with me. Actually, just having that incredible sense of urgency is just one of the most fundamental characteristics of successful people in business. I can't tell you how many people that I see in the business world who are bright and smart, but they don't do anything. They just don't act. And I think it's very fundamental. It was an interesting job. I was very lucky. I started out giving historical tours. I gave them of the old ruins and talked about how Hilton Head evolved. As Mary knows, it was a little bit easy to do because a couple of my great-grandparents had some property there who also were connected with Mary. And I gave these history tours. Now, Charles really wasn't trying to give tours of the island. He wanted to sell real estate. And so the idea was that we would give these tours of the island and go see the old Baynard ruins, and we would get people fascinated with real estate, and they would buy. And, we were pretty successful. I had one of the salesmen that worked in the sales office, and I would get these prospects, and I'd pass them on. And it was a 4-month job. Halfway through that summer, and I really find this interesting, the sales team walked out. It was a very, very small company at the time, 25, 30 people, and there were 5 or 6 salespeople, Wally somebody, I forget his name, and they all walked in one day, and they left. And they moved up into the North Carolina mountains. And Charles and Harold Depkin were sitting there running a company. They didn't have a single salesman working for them. And they didn't have any money. I mean, they were absolutely hanging on by their fingernails. And so Harold came in and talked to me and said, would you help us out in the next few days? I didn't have a real estate license, I didn't have anything. But I became a salesman just like on Tuesday morning. And the good news was I was pretty good at it. And I made some sales, and it got me started in that, in essence, process. It helped out a lot when Mary, Charles's wife, found out that I was her cousin. But she didn't find that out until I'd made a few sales, and I do remember that. One incredible thing came out of that sales process. I came from a small town in South Carolina. Clemson was a small community, and I'd never had very much exposure to what I would call highly successful people in any industry. I didn't do that. But as you may know at Hilton Head, we were selling to highly successful people. I mean, phenomenal people from all over the United States who were absolutely at the top of their careers. And I had an aha in that process, as I call it, because when we were doing these sales, and because I would take these people that ran large corporations and famous doctors and would show them real estate, and they would ask the dumbest questions. And it was just fascinating to me that I knew so much more than they did about real estate. And then I just wasn't that impressed. And I kind of concluded that if they could run those big companies and if they could do things, there was no reason if I applied myself, I couldn't do that. And that sounds kind of, I'm not sure what it sounds like, but it was a real aha, just to understand that I felt like that I could compete with a lot of very successful people. If we think about that time period from 1967 to 1975, when I went there, we had 25 or 30 people working there at Seapine Circle with Charles and Harold Depkin and other guys. 25 or 30 people just getting started at Seapines. Doug Richardson was not there yet. He was one of our bankers. And in 1973, before we imploded, we had over 1,000 development financial people, not operating people. In that 7 years, we grew from 25 or 50 to close to 1,000. And those are all professional people. We were in multiple locations. We started at Seapines, we're at Hilton Head Plantation, we're in North Carolina, South Carolina, Puerto Rico, Florida, building these large communities. An incredible ride. We were the hottest company in America. The bankers gave us money. It was almost unlimited. It was like giving free beer to college students. It was incredible. We were able to borrow $100 million at Palmas del Mar in Puerto Rico without putting any money down. Charles was written up in Time magazine as one of the outstanding young business people in America. Every businessman was carrying him. In around 1970 or 69 or 70, Charles hired that year 32 MBAs, almost all of which were from Harvard and Wharton. He was written up again in Time as hiring more MBAs than any company in the United States, more than General Motors. And it was not only lots of MBAs, it was the best and the brightest. It was incredible. I've been thinking about Google a lot lately, and I can assure you that the Seapines company during those 7 years had as much energy and excitement going on as must be going on with Google out there today. I mean, there was a buzz that was incredible. Merrill Lynch took us public in 1971 or 72, something like that. It was a huge public offering. We all had stock options. I think the stock came out at $4 or $5 a share, or it was priced to us at $4 or $5 a share. We had share options. I was 25 or 26 or 24. Stock went to 27. We were all worth a fortune. I mean, it was an incredible ride. A year later, we were bankrupt. Incredible. I mean, we basically went bankrupt. We never declared bankruptcy. Interest rates went from 3 or 4 or 5% up to 15 or 16%. When we decided to go through the process of could we survive or not, it would have been the largest bankruptcy in the history of the United States at that moment in time. It was a phenomenal process. We elected not to go bankruptcy and basically give all the properties back to the lenders over time because we wanted to do our best and others wanted to preserve the best. But here was this incredible company which, went from the absolute bottom to the top to the bottom in about a 6 or 7 year time period. It was it was like a doctorate degree for somebody at my age and for the many young people that were there. There was just nothing you didn't see. And those 32 MBAs and a lot more that Charles hired, and lots of planners, architects, and engineers have really gone on from that experience really to be the premier resort, primary home, residential developers in the United States today. There's almost nowhere you can go that I don't know a leading player that was a part of that really phenomenal journey. I thought I might just comment a little bit on a few reflections about some of the things that happened at Sea Pines. There's no telling how many things Charles did first. And I'm going to take a little liberty because a lot of these things I'm going to tell you about, he may not have been first, but if he wasn't first, he was second. I mean, he was cutting edge to an incredible degree. I mean, the first and the primary one was clearly in the responsible use of land. That was a term that did not exist in the 50s and 60s in South Carolina. The best land use was Myrtle Beach. It just didn't exist. Charles had studied land use at Yale, had become fascinated by it, and came up with the idea of creating a master plan community. And that sounds pretty simple today, but that did not exist when this started. Did a master plan, which was unheard of, for 5,000 acres of land. It suggested where everything should go, how it should work together, how it should be integrated. Hired a fabulous firm out of Boston, Sasaki, one of the premier land planning firms in the country at that time, to put that plan together. Came up with the idea of land use covenants. Can you imagine telling anybody in South Carolina what you can and can't do with your land in 1965? Those land use covenants said you couldn't cut trees if they were larger than 6 inches in diameter. You had to get your house approved through a design review committee. The house could only be so big, et cetera, et cetera. Out of the 5,000 acres, he said, let's preserve 1,000 acres in the middle for a forest preserve. And it's still there today. Set up guidelines of what houses should look like. He and other great architects, many of which went to Clemson, developed a series and a look and a style for Sea Pines, never done before. Decided instead of like they do at Myrtle Beach, building right on the ocean, let's build back. If you go to Sea Pines today, and now if you go to Kiawah, other places, you see the houses are built 50, 75 feet, 100 feet behind the dunes, and they were deed restricted and so forth, unheard of at the time. Let's build bike trails and walking trails and integrate them throughout the community where people can get to the various areas without crossing the road. Let's create villages, which they did at Harbor Town, at Plantation Club, and down at South Beach. All a part of an integrated plan. All of that was really being done for the first time in the United States by Charles and the genius that he came up with. Now what happened, as you would expect, is the people like myself who saw all those wonderful, fabulous, responsible land use guidelines in the years went out and started implementing themselves. Additionally, visitors came to Hilton Head, huge numbers, and they liked what they saw, and they carried it back to California and other places. So it was quite extraordinary. A second thing that always reminds me about Charles during those days is he did more with less than anybody you could imagine. We never had any money. We were always hanging on, and we realized that we could never advertise nationally. I mean, we just had any money. So the question became, how do we promote this island in the middle of nowhere when we don't have any money? We can't afford ads in the New York Times or Newsweek or whatever. And Charles did it through courting newspaper writers and travel writers and sports writers. I mean, how many tours we all took with the writer from this magazine or that magazine. And we were able to get incredible stories about these adventures. He really was the first person to ever build a golf course and use a golf course architect of significance. As you probably know, the Harbor Town course was designed by Jack Nicklaus and Pete Dye. At the time, they were partners. It was both of their first courses. He wanted to brand that golf course. I'm not aware of another golf course that had been branded. Came up with the idea of the Heritage Golf Tournament. And we were so lucky because guess who won the first golf tournament? Arnold Palmer, which was the last tournament he won. But he had this incredible ability. He hired Stan Smith to do tennis, to kind of creatively figure out a way to promote this island in the middle of nowhere without spending very much money. Again, I can't tell you how many things he did that were first. First condominium project in South Carolina. There wasn't a law of how you build condominiums. It didn't exist. It was the first one, Lighthouse Road Village. Charles and his team actually went to the South Carolina legislature and drafted the law to allow them to build the first condominium project. We built the first timeshare project during that area, right near the Seapones company. We were talking earlier, he recognized that education, I mean, I don't know many people that have built schools in the development business. We had a wonderful Montessori school there, which Mary started. We wanted to make it a good place for employees. My wife Susan taught there. We did a camp for children. Charles figured out quickly that if children were happy, everybody would be. We did children's playgrounds. But there was this phenomenal kind of commitment to do things first. We literally created, or Charles really created, with certainly help, almost a new industry. And it was a phenomenal Google-like time. You know, I would say, though, it's always fun. Thinking back, we can glamorize Charles a little bit too much, and I got to be really careful with his wife here tonight. But it's fun to think about him a little bit because he was so incredibly charismatic for people my age and all of us that were there. He was a genius. He was an early adapter, to say the least. He was an early adapter. Now, that sometimes got us in a lot of trouble because Charles was sometimes 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 years ahead of his time. But he clearly was that. 15 or 20 years ago, before there were cell phones, he was buying up radio frequencies. He was always out front. He was charismatic. He was extremely optimistic. You could hit him over the head with a baseball bat, and he would get up and smile at you and go, let's go work on that problem. An incredible trait. He was entertaining. He was fun. And I think overall, I've never met a person in my life who had such an incredible thirst for knowledge on everything. He was a terrific human being. On the other hand, he was a little goofy. I think it was actually because his mind was always going 1,000 miles an hour on every other subject. I can't tell you how many times I would go somewhere with Charles, and of course Charles would have no credit cards and no money. None. It wasn't on his radar screen. I can remember twice giving out of gas. He hadn't even thought about filling up his car with gas. My favorite one, and I can remember on several occasions where Charles would go out to dinner and just leave his car, forget that he drove his car. He was just I don't know how to explain it, but it was because he was thinking about all these creative ideas, and the kind of day-to-day things that you all have to deal with weren't on his radar screen. My cutest story about him is that first year when Susan and I were there, we went out to dinner at the Plantation Club, which was a fabulous restaurant. Charles had decided we were going to build a great restaurant at Hilton Head, and it would bring people there. It was a wonderful restaurant, and there were no nice restaurants to speak of in the state of South Carolina. He brought in these incredible chefs from Germany and other places. And Susan and I had absolutely no money. I mean, we didn't have a nickel, but we decided it was our first year of marriage. We were going to go to the Plantation Club and have a really fancy meal, you know. And so we did. And it was a very romantic evening. It was a beautiful sight there. And Charles wandered in. Susan tells this story to this day. You know, sees us over at the table because he's always there, and he runs over and he sits down at the table and starts asking questions of Susan and I, which is what he always did. And we were sitting there, and all of a sudden he took Susan's appetizer, put it in front of him, and ate it. and I will never forget it. Talked for another 10 minutes and left. So in addition to this incredible genius, like all of us, he was a little bit goofy occasionally. What I thought I'd do is maybe identify 6 positive lessons I learned from Charles. I might go through with each of those. First is research. I've never met a person so passionate about research, but not in the quantitative sense. We certainly used research firms to compile data. He did a lot of that. But Charles was the best at what I call raw, real research of anybody I've ever seen. He was an incredible reader. As I know Mary knows, he'd go out to dinner, he'd come home 7, 8, or 9, or 10 o'clock at night, and he'd read half the night. And then we would go into work the next morning, and we would have 5, 10, or 15 articles that he had clipped out of magazines. And these were bizarre magazines, magazines you never heard of. They were the Journal of Medicine, the Journal of Accounting, but it was all a part of this kind of early adapter mentality. And we would all, I say we, in management, would get these articles from Charles. I'd get 5 or 10 or 15 a day, and there was a pearl of wisdom, hopefully, in each one of them. And what's happened is our company today at East West Partners, I never go to work that I don't get 5 or 10 or 15 clipped articles from somebody that works for me, all that came with Charles. But he was looking for jewels of wisdom. He was unbelievable at pumping people and asking people what they thought. We had lots and lots of fancy people to come to Hilton Head, doctors, lawyers, environmentalists, etc. And Charles would take them to dinner. How many dinners did we go to? My goodness, I don't remember. And what he would do at these dinners, he would just ask questions all the time. He was unbelievable at that. My favorite was the Sunday afternoon sail, which I've been on many times with Mary on the Compass Rose, a great sailboat. And almost every Sunday for I don't know how many years, that boat went out, and Charles would pick up 5, 6, or 7 or 8 people to go out on that boat during the week and to sail with him on Sunday afternoon from 3 to 5 o'clock. It would be an incredible group of people. And his goal as a part of that was to learn something from those people. And he was extraordinary at doing that. So raw research. He really understood that he needed to be close to the customer, he needed to talk to people, he needed to ask people, and he was unbelievable at it. You know, a second was his commitment to continuous education. He understood that education was continuous and was absolutely, could be a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Now, I remember the Sea Pines Library. We had a library in our company in 1970. We had a librarian, a guy named Don Hobart, who accumulated at that time every single article you could imagine on the resort industry, anything about it. And it was all extremely well cataloged. And that's obviously before the internet. I think the internet would have killed Charles, by the way, if he'd have fully lived with Google. But he was committed to this idea that we could learn, and we had to learn continuously. He was always sending people like myself. He sent me to a ULI convention in 1971 in Baltimore. At a very early age, and he recognized that investment was extremely important. He also believed that in business you could steal from others. It didn't have to be invented here. He called it NIH, not invented here. He used to tell us all the time that we had too much of that NIH disease. And one of the fun things we did, which was a little bit extravagant, we rented 2 727s or 707s. Something called the Sea Pines University, and he packed 150 or 200 people together on 2 airplanes. And what we did, we flew up and down all over California, touring projects and looking at the best things, because Charles instinctively knew that most things at that point in time tended to be generated in California. We had no money, which is amazing. I think it cost $500,000 or $750,000. But interesting enough, I still remember that trip vividly. And it was all a part of his commitment to learning and continuous education, a second lesson. A third wonderful positive lesson was he was always committed to the best, whether it was a land planning firm or Sasaki, Elizabeth Gordon, who did interiors, who was with Better Homes and Gardens magazine. He was trying to bring the best thinking in the best minds. And he did that from all over the world, from the consultants that were involved in these companies. He also had a wonderful way of making the local consultants and people that were closer to home feel extremely energized, because there was that buzz that they were really trying to do something special. A fourth great lesson is he had an unbelievable faith in people. He just believed that if you gave somebody a task, that almost everybody had the ability to get done. And you didn't get any directions when you came to work at Sea Pines. Nobody told you what to do. We used to call it management by vacuum. When Doug Richardson was hired, he was probably put in as the treasurer, and he had 5 minutes of orientation in the morning. You had to go get it. But Charles just believed that people had extraordinary abilities if you gave them the opportunity and created the right environment, that people could perform at excellent levels. And I have certainly found that to be true. I think a fifth great positive thing I learned is to make business and to make the community development business fun. We all do better when we're having fun, and our customers are happy. And if you look at Sea Pines, he made it fun for the incredible art in public places in Harbor Town. If you see the guy there, the Seward sculpture, to the bagpipes that you've seen there in Harbor Town, to the quilts at the Heritage Golf Tournament, Heritage Farms, which you saw on the screen, on and on and on and on and on. He recognized that if we could put fun into business, in our business, it would work. And lastly, I think in terms of positive lessons that came out of that was the importance of networking and being involved in your community. And that's something that you learn from Charles, that kind of the more people you know and the more strong relationships you have, that all of that can work to an incredible advantage. And that everybody involved in business should take their own communities on. I think that was that kind of Hinesville, Georgia kind of upbringing, that you had an obligation not only to run your business, but to contribute in whatever way you saw. So an extraordinary man who created some extraordinary benefits. I think there are, though, a few things on the negative side, not on a personal standpoint, some good lessons of probably some big mistakes that Charles and all of us together made that have certainly framed the business of East West Partners that we'll talk about in a minute. We didn't have enough financial discipline. That we had none would be my description. We were a company that only looked at things expecting them all to go perfect, and they don't. Bad things happen. And we just were not diligent in thinking about downside. We did not have the internal disciplines that we needed. And when interest rates went from 3 or 4% up into the mid-teens, it basically bankrupted our company because we had not prepared for that kind of downside. I would also say that Charles probably wasn't driven quite enough by money. There's always a fine line. He wanted to build great communities and inspire people, and that's fabulous, but you also have to bring a balance, and you have to be committed to profitability if you're going to be sustainable over time. And I think that has certainly impacted our company. A big mistake we made at Sea Pines was we put everything in one basket. It was one company, and if you're in the real estate business, 1 out of every 5, 6, or 7, or 8 projects you do aren't going to work out. And if you have one disaster that's really significant, it can take you down, no matter how you do. We had a disaster. We had some phenomenal successes, but when we went into Puerto Rico with Palmas Del Mar, we really bet the company, and it turned on us. And I think it was a real revelation that you've got to be careful, think more about the downside. My bet is he thought he probably had a little too much youth in the company. We had great energy and great enthusiasm, but any great company has a balance of people, different ages, different diversity, and we were all too much alike. We occasionally breathed our own ether would be my suggestion. And I think in the end we probably tried to grow too fast. Growth is an exciting and wonderful part of the business environment, but you can go too fast. So I think there are a few lessons there that can be learned. But there's no question that Charles was a wonderful human being who has impacted the state, impacted the nation, and the careers of just a phenomenal number of people. I was in Charleston yesterday, and I was touring some real estate, and I had a chance to look at the new bridge, which at least I thought was pretty spectacular. And I think it's the Cooper River, or the Ravenel it's now called, and I really think that bridge is likely to become an icon synonymous with Charleston, not unlike the Golden Gate Bridge in California, in San Francisco. And that bridge was really, the design of that was driven by Joe Riley, who's probably the best mayor in the United States. But in many respects, I know that Charles kind of had a little bit of influence on that bridge, because he was really the first person probably in this state to really recognize that design matters, whether it's in land use or architecture, and it can be phenomenal. So I think he had a little indirect impact on Joe Riley on that bridge. So anyway, a few reflections on him, and now I'll talk a little bit about East West Partners and not try to be too cocky. And I'll also try to apply some of the lessons from the Sea Pines experience that you might see in how we've developed our company. And I should also start to say, at least in our little world now, we're pretty big relative to most people in the resort business, but when we started 20 years ago, exactly this month, we started by building 5 condominiums in Vail, Colorado, 5 townhouses, myself and one other guy, and we had no earthly idea what we were going to do after we built those first 5 townhouses, and that was it. And we didn't have a strategic plan. We didn't have a long-term plan. We just knew we wanted to live in Vail, Colorado, and we said, hey, let's start this little company, and it was no more sophisticated than that. So the more people I talk to in the whole real estate business, that's kind of the way they start. We'll kind of conclude with that. I mean, whether it's Ron Terwilliger, who's now the largest builder in the United States, basically that's the same way he started. So, a little on East West Partners. We are a mountain resort developer, long ways from here. I should say we're pretty proud last night that one of our local residents, one of my wife's best friend, Toby Dawson, won the Mogul Olympic bronze medal last night, if you saw Toby, which was pretty cool. But we're a mountain resort developer. And we're in Colorado. For those of you that you don't recognize him, that is Jim Barker from his visit about a month ago, coming down the slopes. And I'm going to go back here a minute. We're in kind of great places, which is, at least in our business, you always got to think about what your core business is. And we really consider this kind of a risk management approach. We've kind of found it, as long as I've been in the resort business, the great places, the Vails, the Aspens, the Naples, Carmels, et cetera, do pretty well. So our strategy is only to go to the best places. And I think that's generally served us quite well. Colorado, one great example. Vail and Beaver Creek, 2 of the great resort communities in the world. Lake Tahoe, for those who have not been there, is one of the great special natural resource places in the world. That's our 2nd place of business. 3rd, Deer Valley, Park City, the home of the last Olympics. And one thing you might remember about all 3 of those places is they're near major metropolitan areas. They are resorts that have drive-in markets. Vail and Colorado are close to Denver. Park City is close to Salt Lake. And North Lake Tahoe is close to 15 million people in the San Francisco area. We like that as a business strategy. Mountain resort communities are prospering. They are really doing well all across the country, and my sense is they'll continue to do well. I should say that the ski industry itself is pretty flat. About the same number of people are skiing today, skied 5 years ago, and what's really saved the industry has been snowboarding, for those of you who've been there. Almost all the kids snowboard today, and as they get older, that's changing. At first, they were kind of the outlaws on the mountain, but they no longer are now. They've been accepted. The snowboarders are getting older. It's a part of the culture, and it's really kind of reinvigorated the sport. The next thing, of course, that's happening is more focus on summer. If you've been to these 3 mountain resorts, there's no better place in the summertime than Colorado, Deer Valley, and Lake Tahoe. The weather is spectacular. There's very little humidity, and it's absolutely wonderful. The big change in all these mountain resorts has been the focus on arts and culture. And I know I recognized that about 10 or 15 years ago, and I was reading Nesbitt's book, Megatrends, and I read, to my amazement, that more people participate in art and cultural events in the United States than go to every single sporting event or participate in sports in the United States. Arts and culture is where it is in the resort business. Aspen found that out many, many years ago, and we as a company have tried to be at the forefront of significantly increasing our whole focus on arts and culture in summertime. And in Vail today, we have the New York Philharmonic for 2 weeks, the Philadelphia Orchestra for 2 weeks, the Bolshoi Ballet. Aspen has got their musical festival. It's become almost as important as, and so forth. Golf is certainly an important part of each of these communities. It's a great place to play golf. Ball goes a long ways for those of you the golfers because of the high altitude. But we've really become real communities. In Vail today, we have 22 schools in the Vail Valley. It's a big place. And what's happened in these resort mountain communities is what I call they've become resort cities. They're no longer second home communities. They're cities where people come, go to school, build careers, and it's a very fundamental change. What's interesting is zoning is challenged. I know Jim thinks down in Charleston he's got tough zoning, or here over at the Y or whatever. Well, let me tell you, you've not met a tough zoning environment until you move to Colorado. It is almost incomprehensible. Lake Tahoe is the same. We just got a project approved. The prior developers before us took them 7 years, took us 5, took us 12 years to go through the process. Typical zoning takes 3 to 4 years, no matter where you are. What that means is that the value added in your business is the ability to get approvals. It's not money, it's not marketing, it's not sales, not that you don't do those things, but that you have to build a bond of trust within your communities, and you have to identify projects that are contextual within that environment to in essence, be approved. What's always fascinating about it in a place like Eagle County is 95% of our county, and the same's in Tahoe and Deer Valley, of the land's owned by the federal government. Only 5% of the land is fee title, so there's not a lot. Who buys in these mountain communities? Well, it's pretty good. 50-year-old people. 50-year-old people, that's who buys. And why? Everybody's 50. It's really interesting. Number one, that's the point in time that they kind of reach their peak earning thing. They've kind of reached the top of their career. They're making a lot of money. Number two, they've gotten rid of their kids. They've got them out of college, or they're close, so they got more money. They got less financial responsibility. And then they kind of somewhere around age 50 wake up and say, whoops, I'm going to die, and I owe it to myself. And so somewhere around 50 people buy. It doesn't matter if they're buying $100,000 units or $5 million. They buy around age 50. Really fascinating. Now, the good news in our industry is the demographics are phenomenal. I mean, I think most of you know that because of the baby boom, in the next 5 to 10 years, the number of people aged 50 to 55 is going to grow by 30 or 40%. And that's just in terms of a pure business making money. You want to be selling to people that are 50 to 60 years old, because the number of people in that group is just going to grow phenomenally. Second reason it's a good reason to be in business is the whole issue of wealth transfer. You know, we're getting ready to experience the largest wealth transfer in the history of the world as my parents and others pass away and give us that money. It's already starting to happen. It has never before happened in the history of the world. So we got more people, and in the next 10 years they're going to have so much more money than they ever dreamed. And the good news is that we find is that when they get those that transfer of wealth, they like to buy second homes. You certainly have seen that here in the North Carolina, South Carolina mountains and Florida. But it's very, very powerful. And good news is the whole issue of technology. Being able to live and work anywhere, kind of the post-9/11 phenomena. I want to live in Vail, I want to live in Tahoe. It is just phenomenal and incredible demand. More and more people are spending more and more time there. It used to be when we designed a house, we had a kitchen, a dining room and a living room in the main part of the house. Now we tell our architects and engineers the first and most important thing that deserves the prime placement is what? The office. It is an absolute fundamental change in the way we're designing condominiums and houses because people are living there. So at least in our industry, we've got to be smart about it, really good news in terms of what's going on. Why do people buy? Which is always, no matter what business you're in, you always want to really get to that. They buy in Vail not because of the snow, not because of the golf, not because of the flowers. They buy because it's a gathering place. We ask our customers that all the time. They're 50 years old and their children have left and they've got some money. And they're from Topeka, Kansas. And they say, well, now, and one kid's in San Francisco and one's in New York. What's the chances of them coming back to Topeka? Not real good. What about if I buy a condo or a house in Vail? What's the chance of them coming to Vail and us spending a family vacation together? Real good. And it's interesting how they tell us that. They tell us that all the time. And it's really a fascinating buying motivation. If you see that picture, which is an ad I bet we have run in our market as many times as the Marlboro ad, it's a 3-generational picture because we're selling family and gathering place, that we've got something for, in essence, everybody. Just in Colorado, a few of our projects, kind of what we do, we're primarily a condominium developer. These are condominiums that we build on the ski slopes. We'll do about $500 million of condo sales this year. This is the Hyatt Hotel. Some of our good Clemson people were in this hotel last week. That's a great ice rink we built in the village at Beaver Creek to create value. It's pretty cool, and we built condos around it. Great hotel on the ski slope. Cute story there. That's a fire pit out on the back side of the Hyatt, which we built and which we own. And one of the things we do there, I tried to get a picture and I couldn't, is we sell s'mores every night. And we sell these little packages to our guests. And Charles would have liked this, Mary. And you can get a little package of s'mores, and we have sticks out there. And so, it's a Hershey bar, a marshmallow, and a graham cracker, and it probably all cost $1. And we sell them now for $15 a package. And we sold 12,500 packages of s'mores around that fire pit. So I think it's a cute story. But great condominiums. Mostly people are using them. Very few investors. They use them for 1, 2, and 3 months a year. They come from all over the United States, and now about 15% from around the world. Bachelor Gulch is a great project we built right next to Beaver Creek, very much designed after some of the old Yellowstone lodges. That's a Ritz-Carlton hotel there, which we actually did not build, we sold, but it's a gorgeous facility, opened about a year ago, and we built most of the condominiums in that area. That's the hotel, those are the condominiums next door, and that's kind of been our business now for about 15 years. One of our new business lines, which we're pretty excited about, we've done one before, is hotels with condominiums inside of them. And we're actually doing 4 new hotels, which I'll explain, and with a significant number of condominiums in the hotel or around the hotel. This is a new Westin hotel at the base of Beaver Creek. It's 150 hotel rooms and about 250 condominiums. And we're actually using these hotels to anchor our condominium projects. Now, hotels generally are, in fact, hotels are not profitable when you've got to build them in seasonal resorts, given the high cost and the high opportunity. But it's very clear that the services that a hotel provide are, in essence, very attractive to, in essence, buyers. And it's a big part of our kind of business going forward. We have another big project in Deer Valley, which is a phenomenal community, particularly given the last Winter Olympics. They invested massive infrastructure there. We're in Deer Valley in Park City, which is really a pretty cool ski mountain. We'll develop about 250 condos there, mostly ski in, ski out. I should point out as I go through this that we're not a builder. We hire builders, but we actually coordinate their construction. Our biggest project we've ever undertaken, other than Beaver Creek, is out in Lake Tahoe. For those of you who hadn't been there, it's one of the most gorgeous places in the world. It's a spectacular lake. What's particularly good about Lake Tahoe is that there are actually 17 million people that live within 3.5 miles with 3.5 hours of Lake Tahoe. And we've been able to obtain over the last 4 years about 3,000 development units of zoning, which is actually unheard of in California. And I think it's going to become one of the great new resorts in the world. It's at North Star Mountain, and we're actually building 4 separate communities there, and I'll talk about how they work. The first community is a village at the base of the mountain, which opened about a month ago, built around an ice rink, what we learned at Beaver Creek. The second project is a project called Old Greenwood. We just got awarded here the second best new golf course in America. Jack Nicklaus did it. Interesting enough, it's a timeshare fractional product of single-family houses. Most timeshare projects in the United States have been done in condominium buildings, and we've done a timeshare project here with fractional. Very, very attractive product, particularly for young professionals out of San Francisco. I should also say that this entire project, all 4 of these projects, we have committed as a part of our zoning to be LEED certified at the silver level. It's the first time we've ever done it, but we've now completed about 6 or 7 buildings, and it's working. I tell one of the cute stories, as I told this to Jim, is that when we first decided to make this commitment to go green and try to at least get the silver level, all of our consultants told us that we couldn't do it, that it was going to cost 10 or 15 or 20% more. And we kind of went back to them and said, well, that's fine, but we're going to use some other consultants. And what was really interesting is they went back to work and became a part of the process. and have really very much gotten into it now in these first 6 or 7 buildings. And we don't know exactly how much extra it cost and exactly what the payoff, but it's absolutely minuscule. I mean, it's 1% or 2% or 3%. It's not 10 or 15. But what was required was kind of a mindset change by everybody to, in essence, accomplish this, and it's working. That's the new golf course which opened. That's Nicholas on the site. We're doing a new golf course, a third golf course with Peter Jacobson, who is, I think, one of the neatest, funnest guys I've ever met. For those of you that don't know Peter, he's a great golfer, an exciting guy, and his claim to fame is he plays with Hootie and the Blowfish, which I think is pretty cool, and it's a nice new community. What's interesting about these 4 communities, which will be about 3,000 units, there are 4 separate communities located 5 or 6 miles away, and what we've put together is what we call the Tahoe Club. And if you live in any one of the communities, you get special privileges in all 4, which is pretty good. So if you live in the mountain communities, you get to use the facilities on the golf course. If you live in the golf course communities, you get to use the facilities on the mountain. You get special privileges, cutting ski lift lines, special restaurants, etc. And it's really differentiated us. This is a picture of our new restaurant on the top of the mountain that is a private restaurant just for our real estate owners. But a gorgeous place. In addition to the golf, the tennis, and the dining, etc., just being a part of fly fishing and sailing and kayaking and hiking and so forth is really a part of this whole club facility. A fabulous restaurant we built on the lake called Wild Goose, a part of the club for these 4 communities. It's a phenomenal undertaking. We've probably sold about 1,000 units now, and it's going to be a major focus. Those are our 3 mountain communities, but about 4 years ago, we decided to take a detour to the city, which I think at the moment is my favorite project. We're in downtown Denver, which I think, if you've not been there, is one of the great cities in the United States. It's absolutely spectacular. And we were able to buy a 25-acre parcel right in downtown in an area called Lodo, which is right next to Union Station and right between Coors Field, the Pepsi Center, and Invesco Field. It's a pretty exciting project. We got a great bridge right there. I just showed that picture. That's right at the end of the transportation system. Denver's probably got the best transportation system other than New York in the United States. But it's a pretty cool project. It's 25 acres, 2,500 units. We've completed about 11 or 12 condominium projects there now, about 1,000 units, and it's really becoming a vibrant part of downtown Denver. One of the fun things we were doing, one of the things we learned from Charles was to build restaurants. There was a great restaurant we built, of course, Old Fort Pub, when we were trying to build something where there wasn't anything up at Hilton Head Plantation. And we were kind of struggling here in downtown Denver because we were a little bit out of the way. And so we came up with the idea of doing a great restaurant, Zingo's. If you're ever in Denver, you want to go to it. Zingo's terrific. And the reason we built this restaurant was not to make any money. We knew we weren't going to, but to get people from all over Denver to come to our downtown project if we could build an extraordinary restaurant. And we came up with this idea of Zingo that now is so successful you can't get in for a month. And it's phenomenal. And Mark Smith, my partner there, went and hired Jeffrey Beers, one of the great restaurant designers in the world, out of New York City, a fabulous chef from New York, Richard Sandoval, and we put together the concept for this restaurant. We opened it about 1.5 years ago, and it's had a phenomenal impact on the success of this downtown project. It has brought people down there that would, in essence, never come. But it's all a part of what you got to do if you're in marketing and doing real estate. These are just typical loft projects that we're doing in downtown Denver. Really pretty exciting. Brownstones, townhomes, and there's no question that in Denver, and I don't know how much this is true, I mean, we're seeing just this phenomenal number of people wanting to go into downtown Denver. We clearly have got all our 25 to 40-year-old singles that just have no interest in living out in suburbia. But what's happening in Denver, as I think is happening in a lot of major areas, is that the problems of suburbia and the problems of traffic and isolation, et cetera, and sprawl have become so significant that we're just seeing a huge number of people that want to move back into a downtown environment. And it's really fueling it. I think it's a real paradigm shift that we're likely to see. Fabulous new project we're doing called the Glass House. It's a two 23-story towers right down on the project. And what's interesting on this one is we're doing all of our marketing, which we'll talk about in a minute, through the internet. We're not doing any brochures, not doing anything, and it's a pretty neat deal. If you want to get on the list and follow this marketing, go to www.glasshousedenver.com, glasshousedenver.com, and register for this project because it's all happening on the internet, which is a really big change. But neat stuff. Really neat downtown urban projects that have revitalized Denver. Our most fun new project, we're doing a W Hotel, which has been great fun in downtown Denver with about 250 condominium projects built around it. It's our second hotel like that. Third one is there. The Skidmore Owens firm has designed it. David Childs is the architect, and I think it's going to really take it to a new level. One fun project we did, we have one partner who got too cold for in Vail, and so he lives in Charleston and commutes. But we did a fun project there, one Vendu that we're quite proud of. We went through an extensive RFP down there, and it's called One Vendu Place. It's 50 units in the downtown historic district, right next to the park, and it's really turned out quite well. The way we actually ended up getting that project in the end, there were three groups that were tied, and my partner Ross came up with the idea, instead of buying the land, we would build Joe Riley an art gallery. He loves art and he loves culture and so forth. So really, instead of paying him any money for the land, we built that art gallery and gave it to the city. And that was a win-win. The only problem was when we got the budget on the art gallery, it was exactly about twice. I think we budgeted $6 or $7 million to build it, and the budget came in at 12 or 13 or 14. But being creative hustlers and recognizing we had to do something, we decided, well, why don't we put a condo on the top, which we did. We sold it for $1,000 a foot and was able to get it get it built. But it was a good creative solution to so forth. But it's a very contemporary art gallery, but it's pretty fantastic. The interiors of the units fits in with Charleston. And just to show you that we've completely lost our mind, we're doing a new big project in Las Vegas. Again, designed by Skidmore. It's a Capella Hotel out of Atlanta, the old Ritz-Carlton guys, and 500 condominiums right next to the Wynn in Las Vegas. And we're off to a great start. There's been some overbuilding out there, but I think in this case our project is pretty much different. So I think we have probably lost our minds. It was pretty good. A little bit on East West Partners and how it's organized, and we'll wrap up. We're kind of a classic integrated company. We build it, we sell it, and then we manage it. And hopefully we do a good enough job managing it that we can sell them something else. So it's almost kind of a circular kind of knowledge. And when I say we build it, though, we're not a builder. You know, we have a small core organizational management team, and we hire outside contractors. And I would like to think that we've gotten, pretty good at doing that. We at East West Partners have been at it for about 20 years this summer. That was our annual retreat here not too long ago. We've had 165 people here with us for 5 years, 90 for 10, and 20 for 15. So I think we've been able to create a culture of excellence that treats people well and keeps them there. One of the neat things we do is we have what we call East West University. We'll have about 7 or 8 conferences this year that we hold all around the country for all of our employees, where they can go and learn and share best practices. Pretty cool concept. Again, what we do on the build it side, we have a core management team. We try to keep our overhead really low. We don't have a lot of people, but we have generalists, and we can manage the concept. We can manage the 20 or 30 consultants you might do. We bring in the best consultants. We do our absolute best to make them feel like they're, in essence, a part of the team. We sell it. Marketing and sales are really important. I started with that. We've got marketing and sales organizations in each of our areas, and in the Vail Valley we'll do over $1 billion in gross sales this year with about 150 agents. But it's an integral part of what our culture is. And then we manage the units. We've got a property management company that manages all things as we build, and we probably manage about 3,000 condominiums today. And again, the idea is, though, that once we get these people in their units, if we treat them well and truly deliver them what we call a hassle-free experience, then they'll buy something else and they will refer their customers to, in essence, other people. I mean, the cheapest customer is the one you've already got. And we really focus on that because these, the best salespeople we got are, in effect, our customers, and that's an integral part of what we do. You know, from a financing standpoint, I just talk a little bit about this because it relates back to Charles. We have two major financial partners. The first is Crescent Real Estate. It's a firm that was formed by a great investor by the name of Richard Rainwater. They've been our partner for about 15 years. They provide significant equity into our project. What it allows us to do is to do better project, and it also allows it, we no longer have to sign any notes whatsoever. We've got enough equity in our projects that no personal guarantees are required. And that all comes out of that Sea-Pines experience of what can happen when things go bad. We obviously, as individuals, don't make as much money because we're sharing a huge amount of it with somebody like Crescent, but we've minimized our risk. We sleep at night, we're able to do great projects, and we have a good time. Crow Holdings is also another wonderful institution that backs us, and then a whole series of construction lenders. From a risk management standpoint, we probably spend more money on marketing and sales than any other real estate company in the United States. Certainly more on internet marketing and sales. And the reason is we believe that's risk management. If you sell things, it kind of all works out, particularly if you sell them early. So we invest in the best models, the best graphics, the best design, the best units, et cetera. We do extensive pre-marketing, et cetera. In 2 of the 3 states we're in, one of the good things that happens is we're able to use people's deposits in construction. So if you buy a $1 million condo for us, you make a $200,000 deposit. Even though we haven't built the unit, we can use that $200,000 in construction. That allows us to have a lot higher returns, IRR, for our various investors. From an organizational standpoint, we modeled our company not only after Sea-Pines, but after Trammell Crow. For those of you that know the real estate business, there's certainly been no more successful company than Trammell Crow organization. I mean, they are our model. They've had a few ups and downs over the years, but they're pretty phenomenal. And the other great companies to come out of Trammell Crow are the Terwilliger Company, the Wood Company, Archstone, Greystone. All of those people worked at Crow, and they've organized, and we've all organized ourselves the same way in multi-markets. The first thing, we're decentralized. In our parent company, we have myself and a CFO and some people who do consolidated financial statements. We don't do anything centrally. We do everything in our 4 markets. We believe that real estate is a localized business, cannot be run out of a central office. So all of our staffing occurs to local. 2 people in this entire company, myself and the CFO. Now, the next thing is that we believe very strongly in employee ownership. When you're doing this many projects, there's just absolutely no way you can control them because everyone is in essence different. We have about 100 employees now that work for us that own a piece of each property that they work on. So if they're building a project in Las Vegas or downtown Denver, if they're the construction manager, if they're the finance manager, they might own 0.5%, 1%, a quarter, 2%, whatever that percent of our equity might be, they are in effect owners. So we've got everybody within the company acting as owners. They may make a mistake. They may overspend or sell things too cheap, but at least Craig and myself, we know that they at least had the same financial incentive that all of us had. And I think that corporate culture of employee ownership is critical. Clearly, we have probably more than anybody embraced technology, and that's hard for somebody my age, but we have. About 90% of our customers now go on the internet before they buy. It's phenomenal. We're averaging about 400,000 hits a month on our websites for our projects. This is the Slifer Smith and Frampton one. We've got about 15 properties online. We update. We have 4 photographers in our 4 communities that upgrade our properties on a daily basis. Extensive broker and administration tools. It's unbelievable how the business has changed. And we have done absolute state-of-the-art web design. If you really want to have fun on how we sell stuff, again, this is that website, www.glasshousedenver.com. Go register and make like your customer. We haven't gone to market yet. We have a 389 unit project. We have 7,000 people that have registered to find out about this project. The good thing about it is it's the incredible information we get out of it. If you register, then every 2 weeks you get push email. It's going out and information on all of these projects. But it really has, the real estate business is usually a business that's pretty slow to respond, but I certainly in my life have never seen anything like the transformation that's occurring in e-marketing. So anyway, that's a little bit of an overview of, I hope it wasn't too much of a commercial, but it's a fun and exciting business. I thought to conclude, I might mention, for those of you that would like to get in this crazy business and come skiing, 5 or 6 or 7 things that I've always told people when they ask me about how to get in the resort and the hospitality business, and each one of them is different. Number one, there's no better place to start than sales. I started there. A huge number of people started in sales. I don't mean general brokerage sales, but if you can get in sales in a timeshare project, in a new community, on a project, it's the best. When Trammell Crow was starting his business 35, 40 years ago, Trammell hired the best and the brightest, not unlike Charles. And at the time, Trammell Crow was an industrial business. And when you went to work for Trammell Crow, you had to lease industrial property for 1 year. You graduated from Harvard, you leased industrial property for 1 year. Trammell just believed in the gut and culture of his property that if you had to face a customer in sales and learn how to respond, that it would be something that you would carry with you for the rest of your life. So many of the people that went to work with Sea Pines, many of which went to Harvard, other fancy schools, guess what they did in the summer? A huge number of work for a company called Southwestern. I think they're still out there. Southwestern's from Nashville, Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. At the time, they were in the business of selling Bibles door to door in small southern towns. Jim Chafin, Peter Rummel, Jim Light, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could give you 30 or 40 executives at Sea Pines who sold Bibles door to door in small towns. Incredible, in essence, benefit. It was a fabulous company. The other great company that did that was the Tom James Company out of Atlanta, and a lot of these people sold suits. I remember that. Very, very good way to get in the real estate business. Fabulous. Second good way, if you can get on with an iBank. And they're tough. They're hard to get on, whether they're in Atlanta or New York or whatever. If you can get with the investment banks and be an analyst for 2 years, it's phenomenal. My son had the opportunity to do that with Merrill Lynch. They don't pay you anything, and they kill you. But you really get about 10 years of education in 1 year. You work 6 or 7 days a week. You work 15 hours a day. They grind you. It's unmerciful, but it's some of the best training that you can absolutely get in the world. A third piece of advice I always suggest that if you could actually get with an iBank internationally, that's even better. If I was starting out now and I wasn't going into sales, I'd go to Beijing or Hong Kong or Singapore or wherever. I mean, what's going on in that part of the world is phenomenal. And to go there for 1 or 2 or 3 years would be great. A fourth thing I always suggest is if you, in the real estate hospitality business, you want to be with a small company, you want to build a private company. You do not want to be with a public company. This is not a business, real estate to public. I know the REITs have done well, but they're just not in the development business. And particularly, I'm on a public board, Joe Company down in Florida now, and the burden of being a public company is like the burden of running a university. The transparency that you have to go through is such an incredible burden that it's almost impossible to be successful. So go with a private company. Find a company that's got a buzz, or whatever your industry is. I don't know how you find out what company's got a buzz. Don't be worried about what you make, but what company's got a buzz. We had a buzz when we were at Sea Pines, and I feel sure there's some companies in this area or elsewhere that have got that buzz. And you just got to kind of hustle them. You want to be with a company that's moving and doing things and action-oriented. I mean, you're trying to find a business and a company where you can get your doctorate degree in those 3, 4, or 5, or 6 years. A fifth thing I always say to people is, at least in the real estate business, at some point in time, go where you want to live. You only live once here. There are no second acts here. So I think you're mighty smart to go wherever you want to go. I mean, for me and Susan and our family, it was Vail. I was living there. We started those 5 condo projects. I was offered a very significant job somewhere else, very significant, but I just said, nah, I want to live in Vail. That's my place. And wherever it is you want to be, at appropriate time, a little experimentation's good, I would go there. And then last, I say you always find jobs and get in this business, and then even once you get in, you survive if you network and volunteer. That's what it's all about. It's a people business, it's a network business, and you just cannot spend too much time, getting involved in organizations, whether it's ULI or the AIA or the local Rotary Club or whatever. Get out into the community and show people that you are, in effect, a producer and that you're a good person. And if you do those kind of things, I think the odds are pretty likely that you'll be successful. So anyway, that wraps up 10 minutes early what I was supposed to say, and I hope I said something that was helpful and interesting, and I would be glad to take 3 or 4 questions. If you need to run out, feel free, but I'll take 3 or 4 questions on any subject, and I love the really hard, nasty questions. So I've got to take a couple from somebody. Yeah, somebody. I got to have one now. I'm not going to leave without it. Yes?
How did you get 3,000 units?
The question is, how do we get 3,000 units in Tahoe? Well, we were a little bit lucky in that Tahoe, a number of years ago, had done a community plan, and it had taken about 6 or 7 years to get done. And we became involved in that community plan. So they were basically, California actually, they do some bad things in California, but they do some good things. And one of the things they do is they do community plans. In other words, you have to plan whatever county, whether it be in Oconee County here or whatever we're in, they have to do a complete master plan of the county, and they determine they're going to be, X number of units and what the impact's going to be on transportation, water, sewer, zoning, quality of life, the environment, et cetera. It's a very long, arduous process, but if you get involved in that process, you can kind of figure out the likelihood of which areas are going to get approved. But it does require, as I said earlier, it requires building a bond and a trust within that community. And I think that's one of the big things that's really happened in our part of the world. I mean, it used to be when you're going to get a project zone, we as a developer, we have this piece of land over here, and let's say we wanted to do 500 units on it. Well, what would we do? We'd walk in and say, we want 1,000. That was the typical developer approach. We want 1,000 units, and we go through this thing, they beat us back down to 500 units, and at the end we'd smile and say, we got them. And we probably would mostly have avoided community impact fees, our share of this, that, and the other, et cetera. And that was the way zoning was done for many years, but it's certainly changing everywhere. It probably changed a little faster out west. As an example, we had to get a project called Eagle Ranch approved, which is a very nice 1,000-unit community in Vail, down valley for employees. We probably had, I don't want to exaggerate, 25 public meetings that we held with every constituent group, first to get their input on what they envisioned for the community, what was important to them, what wasn't important. We then presented plans to different groups, got their input, went through the entire 2-year process of that where those people that live there and those people that were stakeholders in the community felt like they were actually a part of creating their own future. And what we find in the end is that usually when they have that kind of involvement, they're pretty reasonable. It's when you take kind of the old paradigm of zoning approach that you get these incredible conflicts. After that project, when we got to the final plan, we didn't have one single person to speak against us at the actual governmental public hearings. Now, what I really hate to often say is, because we went through that process, we have a better plan. I mean, too often we as developers and planners like Ed and others think we kind of have all the answers. But not unlike designing a car, to the extent you involve your customers in that design process, not only do you get it designed, get it approved, but you end up with a better product. They're pretty good at it. And that's kind of the normal process we now have to go through on any project. I kind of call it community involvement. And it's creating projects and communities that are contextual, that are appropriate for that particular reason. And I think the developers that are going to win and be successful and prosper in the next 5 or 10 years are going to be the developers that adopt that model and kind of discard the old model. It's interesting. Couple more? Yes. Right. The question was, what about our P&L? Well, when you're going into development projects, our first rule, which I learned from a guy named Richard Rainwater, is to make sure we don't lose any money. A good rule. Richard said to me, and I asked him one time, I said, how in the world do you do it? He's probably at the time, the most premier venture capitalist in the United States, and he looked at 100 deals a week. And I said, well, how in the world do you figure out, he did Disney, he did Texaco, et cetera, et cetera. How do you figure them out? And Richard said, well, I don't know. I've got some instincts about which ones are going to work. But if I do 10 deals, I want to make sure I don't do a single deal that loses money. I may not make any money, but I don't want to lose any. And if I have a couple where I get my money back, or 3 when I get my money back and don't lose any, and if I make a lot of money on those other 6 or 7, I will do, in essence, very well. So I think as we look at any project, that is really what we are focused on, not to lose money. We're trying to make sure we got the water, the sewer, the zoning, the pre-sales, the financing lined up. We're taking almost no risk is principle number one. When we're building condos, our profit margin after some fees is, they range from 8 to 15%. We'd love to have 15 or 16 or 17. We don't really get that, but if we can get 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12% as a percentage of gross margin, we're happy. Now, in terms of internal rate of return, what we've got to deliver to our investors, we have basically a hurdle rate of 12%. So we have to give them a 12% return on their money before we get any participation. Well, sales is usually 5 or 6. Marketing could be 1, 2, or 3. Going back to that final question, though, again, that's the way it works with our investors, just where everybody understands it. They put up most, if not all, the money in these deals. They get their money back, usually like a 10 or 12% preferred return on that money, and then we share profits after that. For us to do really well as a company, we really need to generate internal rates of return to our equity capital of around 20%. If we do 20% up, our investors are thrilled, and we have, in essence, made money. But that's the kind of investor we've got. We take a company like Crescent or even Crow Holdings, they would put us in terms of their investment, we're a little bit more speculative. We're not like doing a real estate deal when you just go buy an office building that's already built there. We're doing development. So where they might be looking for a 9, 10, or 11% unleveraged return on an office building that's already there, when they do a more speculative investment with us, they want to earn 15, 16, or 18, or 20%, if that helps. Yes, Ed?
Harry, for 15 or 20 years, the developers and the environmentalists seem to be on opposite ends, and just almost refuse to talk to each other
Right.
in the same fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Then I got the impression that Jim Chase really made a dent in that.
Mm-hmm.
Started getting the black hats and white hats to meet in the same room and talk
Yeah.
to each other.
Right.
Did that really happen? Is that a true impression, and where does it stand now?
Yeah. I think it's clear there's no question there's more collaboration going on than has ever gone on before. Is it all the way? No. But is it significant? Yeah. And I really think that, ULI to some degree kind of fashioned the term smart growth. And I really do think there's smart growth out there, and I think most people would agree. Now, that's the devil's in the details there. But to the extent groups are coming together and talking about it, growth is very complicated. It's not a black and white issue. It's very, very tricky. Balancing, the environmental considerations with the economic considerations is really tough. But there's no question in my mind when people come together, we're more likely to get good solutions. And smart growth has really become, synonymous. The ULI District Council that's here in South Carolina is doing some neat stuff right now. Is it perfect? No, but they're making great progress. There's no question it is. And it's the only way to survive. So we'll take one last question, and then we'll be done. Yes.
I believe, decentralized company, of course, the employees, the
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, I think in fact, we just did a survey of all our employees, and I feel pretty good about that, about trying to understand what our culture is. You know, we just at East West, we do things right, and people that don't do things right, they don't last. I mean, you know, we let people go that don't fit in. If we find them cutting corners, we let them go. And we've got a larger organization to our entire organization, and I think very much I learned that from Charles. I mean, we just do things right. And I think most people that have gravitated our company, I mean, they know, they live in their communities. They know they're going to have to ride by these projects forever, and their friends are going to be there. And they just kind of instinctively kind of self-select that they want to be a part of doing something that's good. And I think that's really important. Now, on the other hand, I mean, because they're owners, I mean, let's not underestimate the profit motive for all of them, and it's finding that balance between the two. Okay, well, thank you very much. Hopefully that was good.